They told us the pyramids were tombs, solemn graves for long-dead kings entombed in an age of dust. But what if that story is incomplete? What if these stone giants standing at the edge of Cairo's ever-sprawling city are not the genesis of civilization, but its echo? Their symmetry is almost unnatural, their scale beyond comprehension. Standing at their feet, one does not feel as if they were witnessing the beginning, but the last breath of something far older. There is a silence here that is not absence, but memory. Beneath the scorching sun, in a desert that once pulsed with green life, these monuments whisper not about death, but about survival. Before we go deeper, a quick call to you, our fellow seeker of lost history. If you're intrigued by the idea that the pyramids might be far older than we've been taught, subscribe to the channel. Now, for more hidden truths and ancient enigmas, drop a comment below letting us know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if this mystery grabs you as much as it does us, share this video. It tells a story that deserves to be remembered. Long ago, this land was not barren. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was a cradle of rivers, forests, and lakes. Fossilized remains of hippos and crocodiles have been found deep in what is now arid sand. Pollen samples recovered from ancient lake beds tell of grasses, flowering trees, and monsoon rains. Satellite data from NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission has revealed ancient riverbeds, paleochannels snaking silently beneath the desert. One of these, the Taman Russet River, once carved its way across the continent. Another, the Aramat branch, wound near the Giza plateau itself, possibly washing against the very stones of the pyramids. If you stood on that plateau in 10, Nula Betse, you would not see sand and silence, but a thriving savanna teeming with life. Herds of gazelle would roam under the acacia trees, and rivers would glint in the sun like silver threads. People, too, would have walked these lands, not nomads, but skilled observers of the sky and stone. Their stories are not preserved in papyrus, but in the alignment of monuments and the erosion etched into limestone. What we call the African humid period was their golden age, a time when the heavens were charted and knowledge was preserved in geometry, not ink. Then, catastrophe, around 800 years ago. Earth was struck by a sudden climatic event known as the Younger Dryas. Within decades, perhaps less, global temperatures plunged, the rains ceased, forests died, rivers became memories, ice reclaimed the north, and deserts crept into what had once been Eden. What caused this is still debated. Was it a fragmented comet that exploded in the atmosphere, triggering massive fires and sending soot skyward to choke the sun? Or was it a sudden release of glacial meltwater disrupting ocean currents? The answer may lie not only in ice cores and soot layers, but in myth. Across cultures, stories persist of a time when the skies burned and the earth convulsed. In Egypt, the tale of Atum, rising from the chaotic waters of Nun, mirrors the rebirth of land from flood. In Mesopotamia, gods brought fire and then rain. In the Andes, the Viracocha gods rebuilt the world after darkness and flood. These are not simply parables. They are possibly fractured memories of a shared trauma, a global event encoded in myth so that it might survive when all else was lost. In such a moment, when the old world collapsed and nothing remained but fragments, what would a people do? They might build, not in triumph, but in defiance, not to record what was, but to ensure something, anything, would endure. Perhaps the pyramids are not monuments to death, but to memory. They are the skeletal remains of a world already vanishing, and perhaps that is why they stand alone, so precise, so silent, because everything else was swept away. This idea is not fantasy but grounded in evidence. The limestone of the Sphinx enclosure bears vertical grooves, patterns formed by rainfall, not wind erosion. Such weathering would have required centuries of heavy precipitation. Impossible, in the hyper-arid climate of Egypt for the past 5,000 years. Yet these marks remain undeniable. Geologist Robert Schoch argued in 1991 that the Sphinx must predate the Old Kingdom by thousands of years. He was met with ridicule from traditional Egyptologists. But the rocks do not lie. Their story is one of water, not sand. And that water fell when the Sahara was green. If we follow this thread, a new picture emerges. The people who survived the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas may have migrated toward the Nile, the last surviving artery of life. There, over generations, they gathered, remembered, and built. They aligned their monuments to the stars, not for superstition, but because the stars were constant. The sky, after all, was the only thing that had not collapsed. It became a calendar, a compass, and perhaps even a message. What better way to preserve knowledge than to write it in stone and align it with the heavens? And yet, these stones are not merely scientific instruments. They are sacred. The Great Pyramid is not just a marvel of engineering. It is a monument of intent. Its sides are aligned with true north with astonishing precision, deviating by mere arc minutes. Its base is level within a fraction of an inch across 13 acres. No inscriptions name the builder. No treasures were found inside. It is as if the structure itself is the message, a message carved by a people who knew their world was ending, and who chose to speak not in language, but in geometry. So we must ask the forbidden question. What if the Pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx are not the beginning of Egyptian civilization, but the remnants of something older? A culture whose name is lost, whose cities lie beneath the Nile's silt or the Mediterranean Sea, but whose voice echoes in stone. The traditional model of history cannot yet answer this, but the earth itself, the wind, the rain, and the stars they may hold the key. Today, tourists climb buses and crowd around the base of these structures, taking photos, posing with the Sphinx. Few stop to listen. Fewer still imagine the world as it once was, lush, vibrant, alive. Fewer still feel the weight of time in the stones beneath their feet. But if you close your eyes at dawn and listen to the wind, you may just hear it, the hush of a river that once ran here, the murmur of builders who knew the stars better than we know our own history, a civilization that dared to leave behind something permanent in a world that was anything but. Beneath the golden silence of the Sahara lie ghosts, ghosts of rivers that once roared, of lakes that shimmered beneath the sun, of wetlands teeming with life. Today, the desert is endless and dry, a sea of sand stretching from horizon to horizon. But it was not always so. 12,000 years ago, this region was alive. Lush grasslands waved in the breeze, and ancient waterways carved deep channels into the earth. The Sahara, now the largest hot desert in the world, was once green, fertile, and filled with the pulse of moving water. We know this not from myth, but from science, from satellite radar, from fossil pollen, and from the bones of hippos long buried under dunes. NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission revealed this hidden past in astonishing detail. Beneath the surface of the desert lie paleochannel's ancient riverbeds, invisible to the eye, but unmistakable from space. The Taman Rasset River, for instance, once cut across what is now arid wilderness, stretching from the Hoggar Mountains of Algeria toward the Atlantic. Its basin was enormous, the size of Western Europe. It carried more than just water. It carried life. Fossil pollen recovered from sediments along its former course confirms a thriving environment. Trees, grasses, and flowering plants flourished along its banks, and creatures like crocodiles and hippos roamed freely. More recently, another buried river was discovered, the Aramat branch. Unlike the distant Taman Rasset, this one passed near the western edge of the Nile. Its path runs dangerously close to the Giza Plateau. In Arabic, Aramat means pyramids, a haunting coincidence that becomes less coincidental the more we learn. It's possible, likely even, that this lost river once nourished the very land where the Great Pyramids now stand. Imagine that. The pyramids, not isolated in desert silence, but standing beside a slow-moving river, reflecting in its waters, their mirrored shapes shifting as reeds swayed and birds darted across the banks. Geological core samples pulled from the Nile Valley and nearby depressions tell a story in layers. Beneath the sand lie strata of clay and loam, rich with datum's microscopic algae that grow only in standing freshwater. In the Fayum Depression, researchers found evidence of once massive lakes that expanded and contracted over millennia. In the now dry Lake Mega-Chad, once larger than the Caspian Sea, wave-cut terraces remain etched into stone, proof that water lapped its shores for thousands of years. These were not isolated oases, but part of a massive, interconnected ecosystem, a green corridor that stretched across North Africa like a web of life. This fertile age, known as the African Humid Period, began roughly 14,800 years ago and lasted until about 500 years ago. It was caused by a subtle shift in Earth's orbital tilt and axial precession, which in turn pulled the monsoon belt northward. The result was extraordinary. Rains that once fell on the equator now fell on the Sahara, and with those rains came rivers, lakes, and, eventually, people. Human footprints followed the water, and the water led them east toward the Nile. As the climate began to dry again, as the monsoons withdrew and the grasslands faded, people moved with the shrinking rivers. They left behind the dying lakes and followed the last great waterway that never vanished. The Nile became not just a river, but a lifeline, and those who arrived on its banks were not primitives discovering civilization, but survivors preserving it. They brought with them memory of skies filled with stars, of landscapes shaped by harmony, of time measured in solstices and floods. Some of them may have built stone circles, like the one discovered at Nabta Playa near the modern Sudanese border, dated to around 6007. Nula Betse. It is the oldest known astronomical alignment in the world. The stones align with the summer solstice and the rising of Sirius, the same star later revered by dynastic Egyptians as the soul of the goddess Isis. Such continuity cannot be coincidence. It suggests that the cultural seeds of dynastic Egypt were sown long before its pharaohs rose to power. They were planted in the rich soil of vanished rivers and cultivated by people who remembered the green. It is this memory, perhaps, that we see reflected in the reverence with which the Nile was treated. The Egyptians called it Iteru, the Great River, and built their entire civilization along its edge. But they also remembered the contrast. They called the fertile land Kemet, the Black Land, and the surrounding wilderness Deshret, the Red Land. These were not just physical descriptions, but metaphysical truths. The Black Land was life, the Red was chaos, and in between stood the monuments. To build the pyramids at Giza required more than stone. It required proximity to quarries. Yes, but also to water for transportation, for people, for life. During the African Humid Period, the Giza Plateau would have been an ideal location, high enough to avoid flooding, close enough to rivers for supplies, and stable enough to endure the centuries. The environment itself may have guided the builder's choice, and when the rains finally stopped and the land turned dry again, those same stones remained, lifted above the tides of time like islands of memory in a sea of forgetting. That is the paradox of preservation. The same climate change that forced migration and collapse also fossilized what remained. Papyrus withered, villages vanished, but limestone endured. The desert, in its desolation, became a vault. In this way, the pyramids and the Sphinx are not anomalies. They are survivors, and the rivers that once flowed beside them? They are not gone. They are only hidden, buried beneath the weight of time and sand, waiting for someone to remember. To imagine what this world once was is to see Giza not as an outlier, but as the center of a network that stretched across a green Sahara, from Nabta Playa in the south to the Tassili Najer caves in Algeria, from rock art in Gilf Kebir to lost channels traced by radar. The evidence is overwhelming. This was not a fringe region. It was a heartbeat. And when the climate changed, the rhythm shifted, but it never stopped. So when we stand before the pyramids today, we are not just tourists gazing at tombs. We are pilgrims returning to a place of memory. Beneath our feet, rivers once ran, and though the water is gone, its presence remains in the grooves of limestone, in the stories passed from mouth to mouth, in the stones aligned with Sirius. The desert is not silent. It is simply waiting for someone to listen. The great Sphinx stares east, unmoving, its gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun is reborn each morning. To most visitors, it is familiar, almost overexposed, a postcard image of Egypt, a human head atop a lion's body, carved from stone, weathered by time. But familiarity is deceptive. When you step closer, when you descend into the enclosure that cradles the Sphinx's body, the monument begins to contradict everything we think we know. The walls that surround it do not look like they belong in a desert. They look as though water once poured down them, again and again, for centuries. The enclosure walls are deeply scalloped, rounded into vertical channels that resemble frozen waterfalls. These are not shallow scratches from wind-blown sand. Wind erosion cuts horizontally, etching sharp lines and faceted edges. What we see at the Sphinx is different. The grooves are soft, undulating, and vertical, exactly the pattern produced by sustained rainfall. This distinction is not subtle. Any geologist trained to read stone can see it immediately. Yet for decades, it was ignored, explained away, or simply not discussed. In 1991, geologist Robert Schoch approached the Sphinx not as an Egyptologist, but as a scientist of stone. He examined the limestone formations of the Giza Plateau and noted that the deepest erosion occurred on the Sphinx enclosure walls carved directly from bedrock. The limestone there belongs to the lower member of the Mokattam Formation, a relatively soft stone that erodes rapidly under rainfall but resists wind. Schoch compared these patterns to known rain-eroded formations elsewhere in Egypt and the Eastern Sahara. The conclusion was unavoidable. To produce erosion of this depth and character, the Sphinx must have been exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of years of significant rainfall. This presented a problem. According to conventional chronology, the Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre. But by that time, Egypt was already arid. The Sahara had been desert for millennia, receiving only minimal rainfall each year. Such conditions could not have produced the erosion visible on the Sphinx enclosure. Schoch's conclusion was radical but methodical. The core of the Sphinx must predate the Old Kingdom, likely by thousands of years, placing its origin somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 years ago, during or just after the African humid period. The reaction from mainstream Egyptology was swift and hostile. Critics argued that the erosion could be explained by salt exfoliation, wind, or poor limestone quality. Yet these explanations fail to account for the vertical channeling and the differential weathering patterns across the enclosure. The northern and eastern walls, partly shielded by the Sphinx's body and later constructions, are far less eroded than the western and southern walls, exactly where rainfall runoff would have been most intense. This is not random decay. It is a climate record written in stone. Adding to the mystery is the Sphinx itself. Its proportions are wrong. The head is noticeably too small for the body, an imbalance that violates the strict aesthetic rules of dynastic Egyptian sculpture. Egyptologists often attribute this to erosion or stylistic choice. But the explanation does not satisfy. Several researchers, including Egyptologist R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch, suggested that the head may have been recarved in dynastic times. If the original head was leonine, the proportions would make sense. A full lion, carved when the Sphinx faced a wetter landscape, later reshaped into the likeness of a pharaoh when dynastic rulers encountered an already ancient monument. This possibility aligns uncannily with the sky. Around 10500 BCE, the constellation Leo rose directly on the eastern horizon at dawn during the spring equinox. The Sphinx, a lion facing due east, would have gazed directly at its celestial counterpart. This is not symbolism invented later. It is astronomy frozen in stone, a marker of time, not merely devotion. If the Sphinx was created in that epoch, it becomes not a dynastic icon, but a relic of a much older worldview. Ancient texts complicate the story further. The inventory stele, discovered in the 19th century near Giza, describes Pharaoh Khufu visiting the house of Isis and restoring a statue of a great lion that already existed. According to the stele, the monument was ancient even in Khufu's time. Egyptologists often dismiss the text as late mythology, but its content aligns precisely with the geological evidence. Restoration, not construction; memory, not origin. Even the stones used in the nearby Sphinx temple deepen the puzzle. Massive limestone blocks, some weighing over 200 tons, were quarried from the Sphinx enclosure itself. These blocks show far less erosion than the enclosure walls they were cut from. That means the walls had already been deeply weathered before the blocks were removed. In other words, the enclosure was ancient when the temple was built. This relative dating is difficult to refute. Stone remembers sequence, even when texts do not. Later, Egyptians seem to recognize this antiquity. By 1000 BCE, during the reign of Thutmose IV, the Sphinx was already buried up to its neck in sand. According to the dream, still placed between its paws, the young prince fell asleep in its shadow and dreamed that the Sphinx spoke to him, calling itself ancient and forgotten, pleading to be freed from the desert. Thutmose ordered it excavated and restored. Even then, the monument was regarded as a relic from a forgotten age, not a recent construction. To accept this evidence is uncomfortable. It challenges the linear model of civilization, the idea that complex monumental architecture emerged only after agriculture, writing, and organized states. But the Sphinx does not care about academic comfort. Its erosion does not conform to dynasties. It conforms to climate, and climate tells us that the world which shaped it no longer exists. Imagine that world: grasslands stretching to the horizon, seasonal rains falling against limestone cliffs, a lion monument rising above a green plain, not as a guardian of tombs, but as a symbol of power, renewal, and celestial order. Its builders may have known their world was fragile, subject to cycles beyond human control. They may have carved the Sphinx not to honor a king, but to anchor memory itself, a message to the future etched into bedrock. Today, the Sphinx sits again in silence, battered by wind and pollution, its face worn beyond recognition. Yet beneath that weathered surface lies a deeper story, one written by water, sky, and time. If the Sphinx truly does not belong in the age assigned to it, then it becomes something far more unsettling, not an anomaly, but a survivor, a witness to a world lost long before history began, standing guard over a truth we are only beginning to remember. Night over the Giza Plateau is unlike night anywhere else. When the crowds leave and the city's haze thins, the stars reclaim the sky. The three pyramids rise from the desert floor like frozen lightning, angled and aligned with a precision that defies their age. Their placement is not accidental, it is celestial. The ancient builders weren't just architects, they were astronomers. They raised their stones with an eye on eternity, mapping not only the earth but the heavens. To understand the pyramids, we must look up. The first to recognize this connection in modern times was Robert Bauval, an engineer with a fascination for the stars. In the early 1992, Bauval noticed a strange pattern. When he laid a map of Orion's belt, the three stars Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka over the layout of the Giza pyramids, the alignment was uncanny, not just in position, but in proportion. The largest pyramid, Khufu's, matched the brightest star. Khafre's pyramid aligned with the second brightest, Menkaura's. The smallest sat slightly off the axis, just like Mintaka in the sky. This was not simple symmetry. It was a reflection. The Giza complex, it seemed, was a mirror of Orion's belt, laid upon the earth in stone. This insight became known as the Orion correlation theory. At first, it was dismissed by many Egyptologists. Coincidence, they said, pattern-seeking. But the more astronomers and architects examined it, the harder it became to dismiss. The precision with which the pyramids were laid out was staggering. The Great Pyramid's orientation to true north is more accurate than most modern buildings, off by less than 3 arc minutes. Its base is level to within a fraction of an inch over 13 acres. To achieve such precision without compasses or satellites suggests not only skill, but intent. Yet the Orion pattern alone was not the theory's full power. Bauval asked a deeper question. When did this alignment match the sky exactly? Because the stars shift slowly over millennia due to axial precession, a wobble in Earth's rotation. The positions of constellations change over time. Using astronomical software, Bauval rewound the sky, searching for the moment when the layout of Orion's belt matched the Giza pyramids perfectly. The answer was astonishing. Around 10 Pietset BC. At that time, the constellation Leo the Lion rose due east at the spring equinox, directly where the Sphinx gazes. Orion's belt hung above the southern horizon, aligned with the pyramids. If true, this date was more than symbolic. It marked the end of the Younger Dryas, the cataclysm that shattered the green Sahara and changed the face of the planet. The implication was profound. The pyramids and Sphinx, taken together, might encode a date, not a dynasty, a timestamp etched in stone, fixed to the eternal motion of the stars. Mainstream scholars argued that the pyramids were built around 2500 BCE, and that any match to the 500 BCE sky was purely chance. But the alignment's precision suggested otherwise. Statistical models calculated that the odds of such a 3-star correlation occurring accidentally, with the same brightness ratio and offset, were less than 1 in 1,000. If this was intentional, it implied long-term astronomical observation centuries, even millennia, of skywatching. To know how the stars moved, the builders would have needed records, tools, and an inherited system of knowledge far older than dynastic Egypt. How did they track the stars so precisely? Ancient Egyptian priests used stellar transit methods. Observing when stars crossed the meridian, they could have aligned their monuments using circumpolar stars that never set, such as Kochab and Mizar. Physicist Kate Spence proposed that the builders used these stars to orient the pyramids to true north. Her model placed the construction of Khufu's pyramid around 2470 BCE, a date that fits the traditional timeline but still acknowledges the builder's remarkable skill. Yet even this model relies on an implicit truth. The Egyptians had been tracking the sky for generations before they began to build. The Giza layout is not the only celestial marker. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend from the so-called king's and queen's chambers. These shafts are not random. When the pyramid was built, the southern shaft of the king's chamber pointed directly at Orion's belt. The northern shaft aligned with Thuban, then the pole star. The queen's chamber shafts aligned with Sirius, the brightest star, and Kochab, another circumpolar marker. These channels were not for air, they were for the soul. Ancient texts say that upon death, the pharaoh ascended to the sky to join Osiris in Orion and sail the eternal river of stars. The pyramid was his vessel. Its architecture was his map. Even the dimensions of the pyramid seem infused with cosmological meaning. The ratio of its base to height encodes pi. Its internal angles suggest the golden ratio. The pyramid's height multiplied by 10, 9 approximates the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Its perimeter corresponds to the equatorial circumference of Earth when measured in ancient units. These numbers may be coincidences, but stacked together, they suggest something more. A civilization that saw mathematics not as abstraction, but as sacred order. This blending of science, astronomy, and spirituality was not unique to Egypt, but nowhere else was it rendered with such precision in stone. The builders of Giza were not merely honoring the stars, they were aligning themselves with cosmic law. In their worldview, to be in harmony with the sky was to be in harmony with life and death, chaos and order. Every measurement, every angle, every shaft was a prayer in geometry. For skeptics, these patterns are accidents, the product of confirmation bias and romanticism. But the stone remains. It speaks in alignments and silence, in shafts that point to long-dead stars, and in proportions that reflect the architecture of the cosmos. Whether or not the builders meant to encode 10, Pietzet Burzer, they succeeded in creating something that draws our eyes not just to their work, but to the sky they worshipped. Perhaps that is the point. The pyramids were built not only to last, but to provoke, to challenge every generation that followed to ask, why here? Why like this? In their quiet precision, they invite us to remember that the stars we see tonight are the same that watched over them, and in that memory, the builders live on, not as kings or gods, but as architects of a message carved in stone and sealed in the stars. Step inside the Great Pyramid and the world changes. The noise of the wind and the bustle of tourists vanish, replaced by a strange, heavy silence. The walls narrow. The air becomes still, dry, almost charged. Every sound, every breath, every whisper echoes as if the stone itself is listening. This is no ordinary space. This is not simply a tomb. There are no hieroglyphs carved into the walls, no golden statues, no mummy, only stone immense, smooth, precise, and the deeper you go, the stranger it becomes. For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid has been called a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, and yet there is no definitive evidence that he was ever buried here. The only reference to his name is a red ochre mark inside a hidden chamber, possibly authentic, possibly added later. No sarcophagus containing a royal body has ever been found. No funerary inscriptions exist within the pyramid. The king's chamber contains a single granite box, unadorned and empty. It is not the resting place of a king. It is something else entirely. The structure's precision is extraordinary. The base is level to within 21 millimeters across an area of more than 13 acres. The four sides differ in length by less than 5 centimeters. The corner angles deviate from perfect right angles by less than 12 arc seconds. Even today, using modern equipment, such tolerances would challenge any engineer. How was this possible in 2500 BCE without the wheel, iron tools, or advanced surveying instruments? And more importantly, why such perfection for a tomb? The materials themselves raise further questions. The core of the pyramid is made of dense local limestone easily quarried, stable, ideal for support. But the casing stones, most of which have been removed over the centuries, were made of Tura limestone, almost pure calcium carbonate. When polished, it reflected sunlight so brilliantly that ancient writers described the pyramid as blinding in the sun. This material is also an excellent electrical insulator. Inside the pyramid, the builders used granite brought from quarries in Aswan, over 800 kilometers away. This granite is rich in quartz, a mineral known to produce electricity when compressed, a property called piezoelectricity, Why did they combine an insulating outer layer with an electrically responsive core? Was this simply aesthetic or something more? Engineer Christopher Dunn proposed a provocative theory. What if the pyramid was not just a monument, but a machine? A resonator designed to harness, amplify, or transform energy from the earth itself? His model begins deep underground, in the so-called subterranean chamber, a rough-hewn room carved into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. Below it lies a natural aquifer, once connected to the ancient Nile. Flowing water, especially through limestone, creates vibrations, low-frequency sound waves that resonate through stone. These vibrations, according to Dunn, could have traveled upward through the pyramid's core. Entering the Grand Gallery, a steep, narrow corridor lined with granite and constructed with corbelled layers that create a harmonic, echo-rich space. Acoustic testing in modern times confirms that the chamber resonates strongly at frequencies around 440 Hz, the A note of the musical scale, and a known harmonic of the Earth's natural Schumann resonance. In other words, the chamber sings, and it sings in tune with the planet. But resonance alone isn't energy. Dunn suggests that the Queen's chamber above may have played a key role. Chemical analyses of residue found in its narrow shafts revealed traces of substances like hydrated zinc chloride and hydrochloric acid materials that, when combined, could produce hydrogen gas. If the chamber once contained such chemicals, their reaction could have released hydrogen into the pyramid's internal spaces, especially the King's chamber. Hydrogen, when exposed to vibration and specific frequencies, can behave in unusual ways. It conducts sound, responds to resonance, and in the right conditions, can amplify energy. The King's chamber, built entirely from red granite, contains 5 enormous granite beams above its ceiling. These beams are cracked long, deep fractures suggesting they were once exposed to massive internal pressure or vibration. No known process of tomb construction could explain such damage. Some researchers believe that these beams acted as dampers or energy regulators, and if hydrogen filled the chamber, it might have served as a medium to transfer or focus vibrational energy. The combination of acoustic resonance, piezoelectric granite, and hydrogen gas could have created a harmonic reaction inside the structure. In 2018, scientists from ITMO University in Russia and the Laserzentrum Hanover in Germany published a peer-reviewed study exploring the pyramid's electromagnetic properties. Using numerical simulations, they found that under specific conditions, the pyramid can concentrate electromagnetic energy into its internal chambers and beneath its base. This energy focusing effect occurred particularly in the microwave band. While the researchers did not claim the pyramid was built for this purpose, they admitted the geometry was remarkably effective, a design that mirrors the function of modern resonant cavities in physics laboratories. Is this proof that the pyramid was a power plant? Not necessarily. We must be careful not to impose modern expectations onto ancient minds, but it does show that the builders understood harmony, resonance, and materials at a level we are only beginning to appreciate. Even if the pyramid never generated power in the electrical sense, it clearly embodies the principles of energy flow, acoustic precision, and cosmic alignment. In ancient Egyptian thought, energy was sacred. It was called Heka, the force that animated the universe. Temples were not just places of worship, they were machines for spiritual transformation. The body of the temple mirrored the body of the cosmos. The pyramid, the most sacred structure of all, may have been built to embody the ultimate harmony between earth and sky, vibration and silence, geometry and divinity. And if the pyramid was indeed a machine, then it was a machine not for utility, but for remembrance, a structure designed to resonate with the very heartbeat of the earth, a monument that sings, not in melody, but in frequency, not for the dead, but for time itself. Its message is not written in glyphs, but in stone, proportion, and sound. And long after we forget the languages of the builders, we may still feel what they knew in the hum of the granite, in the silence of the chambers, and in the unshakable sense that this was never just a tomb. The Pyramids of Giza are not alone. Across continents and oceans, scattered like echoes of a forgotten memory, stand other monuments megalithic, mysterious, impossibly precise, though separated by thousands of miles and built by cultures with no known contact. They share striking similarities: vast stones, celestial alignments, earthquake-resistant designs, and an obsession with permanence. It is as if humanity, in scattered corners of the ancient world, inherited a blueprint, a set of principles encoded not in language, but in geometry, cosmology, and stone. In the highlands of southeastern Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe, a site that shattered the established timeline of civilization. Unearthed in the 1990 seconds by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, this megalithic complex dates back to at least 9 Pietset BCE, 6,000 years before Stonehenge. Here, T-shaped pillars, up to 5 meters tall and weighing over 20 tons, are arranged in circular enclosures. The stones are covered with intricate carvings: foxes, vultures, scorpions, lions. These are not the crude efforts of wandering hunters. They reveal artistic intention and symbolic depth. And the site was deliberately buried, as if the builders sought not to preserve their work, but to hide it. What makes Göbekli Tepe extraordinary is not only its age, but its context. It was built by a society that, according to conventional understanding, should not have existed. No writing, no pottery, no domesticated animals. Yet they quarried, carved, transported, and arranged megaliths with architectural foresight. Researchers from the University of Edinburgh even suggest that the so-called vulture stone may represent a sky map, depicting a comet impact around 950 BCE, eerily coinciding with the Younger Dryas event. If true, the site may not be a temple, but a monument of memory, a warning in stone. Travel southwest to Baalbek in Lebanon, where the ruins of a Roman temple complex rest upon an even older foundation. Here lie the Trilithon stones, 3 megaliths, each weighing around 800 tons. Nearby, an unfinished stone slab known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman exceeds 1,000 tons. No modern crane can lift it. The Roman structures atop these stones are well documented, but the origins of the platform itself remain obscure. There are no records of its construction. The style of the base, gigantic, precisely cut blocks fitted without mortar, bears no resemblance to Roman masonry. It looks instead like something from Giza or Peru. Further east, beneath the waters off Yonaguni, Japan, lies a submerged structure that defies classification. Discovered in 1986 by a diver, the site features massive steps, sharp angles, and what appears to be a terrace or stage. Some geologists insist it's a natural formation shaped by tectonic activity and wave erosion, but others, including marine geologist Masaaki Kimura, argue that it is at least partially man-made. The site lies 25 meters underwater, meaning it was submerged at the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. If Yonaguni is indeed artificial, it predates every known civilization in East Asia. Across the Pacific, in the high Andes of Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman challenges all assumptions about ancient construction. Massive stones, some over 100 tons, are cut into irregular polygonal shapes and fitted together so perfectly that not even a razor blade can slide between them. No mortar was used. The walls curve and interlock, resisting earthquakes with uncanny efficiency. Similar techniques appear in Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu, where monolithic stones form temples and terraces aligned with solstices. The Inca claimed they did not build these structures. They said they inherited them from the Viracocha, the bearded ones who came after the Great Flood. The motif repeats around the world. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu emerged from the sea to teach civilization. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrived after the flood to bring agriculture and calendars. In Egypt, the gods of Zep Tepi restored order after chaos. These myths, though separated by vast distances and diverse cultures, speak the same language, knowledge descending after destruction, teachers of stone, keepers of time, builders of memory. Could these stories be fragments of a single global event, a civilization scattered by cataclysm, its survivors carrying fragments of science and spirituality across the shattered world? Archaeologists generally resist such notions, preferring parallel evolution. Human beings, given the same materials and needs, will arrive at similar solutions. That explains the pyramids in both Egypt and Mesoamerica, the aligned temples in India and Cambodia, the stone circles in Britain and Africa. But that explanation grows thin when the similarities become so specific, when astronomical alignments match, when construction techniques echo across oceans, when myths of floods and star gods surface in every cradle of civilization. Even the engineering challenges align. At Giza, Baalbek, and Sacsayhuaman, builders moved stones weighing hundreds of tons with no known machinery. In each case, the stones are placed with extraordinary precision. They resist time, weather, and seismic activity. These sites were not just built to last, they were built to remember, to anchor knowledge in the only material that could survive the next deluge, the next disaster. Stone is not chosen for ease. It is chosen for eternity. Some researchers suggest that the key is not the structures themselves, but the knowledge encoded in them. The use of geometry, the golden ratio, celestial alignment, and harmonic proportions appears again and again. These are not coincidences. They are signatures. If so, then each site is a page in a larger book, a global codex written in granite and basalt. And the builders? Perhaps not a single lost civilization, but a lineage of memory bearers, preserving fragments of a vanished world. The true mystery may not lie in the monuments, but in what they represent, a shared impulse across humanity to look to the stars, to build with stone, to preserve knowledge when all else fails. The monuments whisper not of conquest, but of continuity. They suggest that long before our modern age, long before writing and empire, people knew something profound, something worth carving into the bones of the earth. And if we listen, truly listen, we might begin to hear it. A harmony across ages, a resonance beneath the myths, a memory not yet lost, waiting in stone. It began with light blinding, searing, impossible light, a flash in the sky, brighter than the sun, followed by shock waves that flattened forests and seared the ground. The air roared with fire. And then the silence came, a silence not of peace, but of aftermath. Around 900 years ago, the Earth was thrust into chaos by an event now known as the Younger Dryas cataclysm. The climate shifted violently. Rain stopped falling. Forests died. Temperatures plunged. For thousands of years, the world had been thawing from the last ice age. And then, without warning, it froze again. The cause of this sudden climate collapse was long a mystery. Traditional theories blamed glacial meltwater flooding into the North Atlantic, disrupting ocean currents. But in the early 2000s, scientists began finding something stranger, evidence not of water, but of fire, beneath a thin, black layer of soil, known as the Younger Dryas boundary layer. Researchers discovered a cocktail of cosmic fingerprints, nanodiamonds, microspherules, melted quartz, and elevated levels of iridium and platinum. These elements are rare on Earth but common in comets and asteroids. The implications were staggering. The data pointed to a massive impact or airburst, possibly from a fragmented comet that struck or exploded above the northern hemisphere around 12,900 years ago. The blast would have unleashed temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Celsius, igniting forests and creating firestorms that engulfed entire regions. Across North America, an estimated 10 million square kilometers of land were scorched. Fires burned so hot and so long that soot darkened the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and initiating rapid global cooling. It was not just an extinction-level event for animals, it was an erasure of ecosystems. The evidence is global. In Greenland's ice cores, the Younger Dryas appears as a sudden shift in isotopic ratios and the presence of impact markers. In North America's Carolina Bays, mysterious elliptical depressions, some geologists believe they see the scars of secondary impacts from debris. In Syria, at the site of Abu Huraira, microscopic glass beads called impact spherules are embedded in charred grain and bones, suggesting a firestorm of immense intensity. Even in the Nile Delta, sediment cores show an increase in soot and charcoal exactly at this layer. And then there are the animals: mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths, all vanished in a geological blink. Their bones are sometimes found in heaps, burned or broken. Some show signs of being flash-fried, their tissues cooked from the outside. For decades, scientists struggled to explain why so many species disappeared so quickly. The comet theory offers one answer. They didn't just die, they were incinerated. For human beings, the consequences were equally devastating. The Clovis culture in North America, known for its distinctive stone tools, disappears from the archaeological record at precisely this time. In Europe, the Magdalenians vanished. In the Near East, settlements were abandoned. It was not the end of humanity, but it was a reset. Survivors were pushed to the margins, coastal areas, riverbanks, highlands. Whatever knowledge had been accumulated in the warm centuries before was shattered, scattered, and nearly lost. But humans remembered, not with calendars or measurements, but with myth. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation. In Egypt, the legend of the Eye of Ra tells of a fiery disk sent by the gods to punish a rebellious humanity. It scorched the land before being called back. In Mesopotamia, Enlil brought storms and fire to cleanse the earth. The Hopi speak of a previous world destroyed by fire from the sky. The Greeks tell of Phaethon, who tried to drive the chariot of the sun and burned the world before being struck down by Zeus. The Chinese record a celestial dragon falling from the heavens, turning the sky red. These are not isolated tales. They are fragments of a shared trauma, a cultural scar preserved in the only way ancient people could preserve it. And across continents, these myths often share the same duality: destruction followed by rebirth. The world ends, but it begins again. Chaos gives way to order. The flood recedes. The sun returns. It is the rhythm of nature, but also the rhythm of civilization. After the fires and the cold, the earth slowly warmed again. Glaciers retreated. Sea levels rose over 120 meters globally, flooding vast stretches of coastline. Entire continents shrank. If advanced settlements had existed along ancient shores, they were swallowed by the oceans, buried beneath silt and silence. In India's Gulf of Kambat, sonar scans revealed submerged structures and grid-like patterns 30 meters below the sea. Near the Yucatan, reports of underwater pyramids still stir debate. Even in Egypt, the cities of Heracleion and Canopus, just 2,000 years old, were only rediscovered recently beneath 10 meters of water. How many cities older than Heracleion now lie beneath waves? How much of humanity's early story is lost, not to war or decay, but to rising seas and erasure? And yet, something remained. In Turkey, not long after the Younger Dryas ended, Göbekli Tepe was built. Circular temples with astronomical alignments, decorated with animals and symbols that may depict the very catastrophe their builders survived. In Egypt, oral traditions later spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when order was restored after chaos. In Mesopotamia, the first cities rose on the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, new beginnings on old land. It is possible that the monuments we admire today are not signs of the first civilizations, but memorials built by survivors, that the pyramid was not the start of memory, but its anchor, that when the skies burned and the rivers dried, a few endured, and they carved their knowledge into the only material that could withstand the fury of time: stone. Science continues to debate the Younger Dryas impact theory. No single crater has been found, though some suspect the remnants lie beneath ice or ocean. But the weight of evidence, geological, chemical, and mythological builds. Something happened, something profound, a reset so complete that it nearly ended the human story before it began. If the Pyramids of Giza and other megaliths across the world were created in the shadow of this event, then they are more than marvels. They are messages, warnings, survivors' testaments, not of conquest, but of endurance, of fire and silence, of memory made stone. If a civilization existed before the flood, where did it go? Where are its cities, its tools, its bones? These questions haunt the margins of archaeology, pushing against the limits of what we are allowed to consider. The Great Pyramid and the Sphinx rise from the plateau like artifacts without origin, neither crude nor experimental, but fully realized. No practice structures, no failed attempts, just perfection, as if someone had built with knowledge already mastered. For conventional history, this is problematic. Civilization, we're told, follows a slow arc, from primitive huts to temples, from stone flakes to megaliths. But what if that arc is not a line, but a loop? The cataclysm of the Younger Dryas could have obliterated much more than megafauna. It could have erased entire societies. In the fertile lands that once spanned the Green Sahara, people thrived for thousands of years. They hunted, gathered, and perhaps much more. The Sahara was dotted with rivers and lakes, some rivaling the Great Lakes of North America. Archaeological digs at sites like Nabta Playa reveal evidence of complex activity: calendar circles, ceremonial structures, and the earliest known astronomical alignments in human history. These were not nomadic drifters. They were sky watchers, builders, and rememberers. But when the rain stopped and the land dried, these people had to move. Most likely, they followed the last great waterway, the Nile. And there, they did not begin from scratch. They carried their memory, not just oral myths, but systems of orientation, sacred geometry, and cosmological models. If their settlements in the Sahara were erased by wind and time, their memory may have found new form in the stone monuments of dynastic Egypt. Perhaps the pyramid texts, which describe a time before kings, echo not mythology, but history as seen through the lens of survival. Buried beneath the fertile silt of the Nile, layers of settlement lie stacked like forgotten pages. Flood after flood has erased and rewritten the landscape. Mud brick structures, tools of wood or bone, even metal, all dissolved by the very river that once sustained life. Modern Cairo sits atop tens of meters of alluvial deposits, each flood layering over what came before. If an early civilization lived here, it now sleeps beneath the city, inaccessible, sealed under roads and houses. Radar scans beneath modern cities have revealed anomalies: walls, foundations, possible ancient streets trapped under layers of history. The Mediterranean coast holds similar secrets. When sea levels rose after the last ice age, the shoreline moved inland by nearly 100 kilometers. Coastal cities, ports, and temples from earlier times would now lie deep underwater. Already, the submerged cities of Heracleion and Canopus, lost only 2,000 years ago, have been found beneath the waves. Their docks, columns, and statues lie intact in darkness, preserved by silt. If such cities could vanish in historical times, what chance do structures from 10,000 years ago have of surviving? And yet, evidence lingers. The Osirion at Abydos is unlike any other structure from the Old Kingdom. Buried deep underground, it is built from megalithic granite blocks weighing up to 100 tons. The style is archaic, without ornamentation. It looks older than the Temple of Seti I, which sits above it. Egyptologists attribute both to the same period, but the Osirion's construction feels alien, like a relic from another age repurposed by later builders. The Valley Temple near the Sphinx presents the same riddle. Its limestone blocks, some weighing 200 tons, are fitted with precision unseen in other Egyptian structures. And yet, the temple contains no inscriptions, no decoration, as if it was never meant to be seen, only endured. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these anomalies as stylistic variation or engineering experimentation. But what if they are remnants? Foundations left by an earlier civilization, adapted and reused by dynastic pharaohs who no longer understood their original function? This pattern appears across cultures. The Romans built over Etruscan sites. The Spanish raised cathedrals atop Mayan pyramids. Each generation reuses the bones of the one before, often without knowing it. Memory becomes structure, even when its meaning is forgotten. Egypt's oldest texts hint at this inheritance. The pyramid texts, carved in the tomb of Unas around 2,300 BC, speak of the followers of Horus, semi-divine beings who ruled before the pharaohs. They mention primeval mounds, sacred places where the gods first brought order to chaos. Later king lists, like the Turin canon, contain columns of names from before recorded history, some with reigns lasting thousands of years. These are usually dismissed as myth, but their persistence across dynasties suggests they meant something, even if not literal. They reflect a deep cultural memory of time before time. Genetics may support this. Recent studies of ancient Egyptian mummies have revealed admixture from sub-Saharan populations during the early periods. Consistent with migration from the West, perhaps from the shrinking Sahara, other studies trace North African lineages back 30,000 years, with sudden reappearances in the early Holocene, around the time the Sahara turned green again. These shifts in genetic signatures mirror the environmental changes seen in pollen cores and lake sediments. They paint a picture not of static populations, but of movement, loss, and renewal. But where are the tools, the scripts, the cities? Most likely, they perished. Clay dissolves, wood rots, copper corrodes. The farther back we look, the less survives. Stone endures, but only if it was used for sacred purposes. If an early civilization built primarily with biodegradable materials, their settlements would have vanished without trace. Only their temples, if any, might remain, and even those may be buried or unrecognized. A pyramid, stripped of its casing stones, can look like a hill. A temple eroded by time becomes indistinguishable from natural rock. Even their knowledge may survive only in fragments. Myths, symbols, alignments. The builders of Giza may have inherited more than land. They may have inherited a blueprint cosmic, architectural, and philosophical, a memory encoded not in text, but in proportion and purpose. In this sense, the monuments of Egypt are not simply structures. They are translations, not inventions, but continuations of a story whose opening chapters have been lost to flood and fire. Perhaps the silence we hear from this vanished world is not absence, but compression. 1,000 voices folded into one shape. A cathedral built on a ruin. A whisper preserved in stone. What if the Great Pyramid is not a message, but the medium? Not a tomb, but a book? Not an artifact, but memory itself, memory carved into geometry, encoded in mass and proportion, hidden in silence. The builders left no names on its walls. No hieroglyphs boast of victory. No statue guards the entrance. And yet, the Great Pyramid speaks. It speaks through alignment, through ratios, through stone. It speaks to the stars. And perhaps it speaks to us. We just forgot the language. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with cycles of seasons. Stars, birth, and rebirth. The rising of Sirius marked the flood of the Nile. The heliacal rising of certain stars guided the calendar. Temples were aligned not arbitrarily, but astronomically. The axis of the Great Pyramid points almost exactly to true north. Its descending passage once aligned with Thuban, the pole star, in 2500 BCE. The so-called air shafts align with Orion's belt and Sirius, associated with Osiris and Isis, the twin deities of death and resurrection. These alignments were not symbolic. They were instructional, maps of the soul's journey, markers of time. The Egyptians believed in a concept called Heka, sacred energy. To them, stone was not inert. It could hold power. Sacred geometry wasn't abstract, it was practical. Spiritual technology. Numbers were not just quantities, they were qualities. The pyramid, in this view, was not just a tomb or temple. It was a vessel, a machine of remembrance, designed to channel cosmic harmony. Its dimensions may reflect mathematical constants, pi, the golden ratio, even planetary proportions. Whether intentional or emergent, these features suggest that the builders saw math not as invention, but as revelation. The alignment of Giza to the stars may be the most enduring proof of this intent. Around 10, Pietset BC, the constellation Orion identified with Osiris stood in perfect alignment with the three pyramids. The Sphinx, facing due east, gazed at Leo as it rose during the spring equinox. The sky above matched the monuments below, a mirror between heaven and earth. If these alignments were designed, then the pyramid complex becomes a time capsule, a message in stone, pointing to a forgotten epoch, not the reign of a king, but the memory of a world. That world, if it existed, is long gone, washed away by floods, shattered by fire, buried under sediment and myth. Yet something endured, not writing, not artifacts, but form. The pyramid may be the ultimate expression of what cannot be forgotten, a shape so stable it resists time, a monument that outlives language. It is the embodiment of the principle the Egyptians called Ma'at order, balance, truth. When everything else collapses, form remains. This is why the pyramid matters, not because it contains a sarcophagus or secrets, but because it contains intention, because it is the closest thing we have to a message from a world that no longer exists. Its mass and symmetry, its orientation and material, even its silence, each element suggests a purpose beyond burial. Perhaps it was meant to resonate not just acoustically, but cosmically, to match frequencies with earth and sky, to hold memory when words fail. The very stone of the pyramid, limestone, granite, and the now missing polished casing was chosen with care. The core limestone is local, quarried nearby. The casing stones were brought from Tura, across the Nile, known for its brilliance. The inner chambers were constructed with red granite from Aswan, over 800 kilometers away. This granite is rich in quartz, a mineral that vibrates under pressure. The materials interact with sound, light, and possibly electromagnetic fields. Whether by design or coincidence, the structure behaves like a resonator. When tones are played in the king's chamber, the walls hum, sustaining frequencies that align with the Earth's own resonance. This acoustic property is not unique to Giza. It appears in megalithic sites worldwide, from Stonehenge to Newgrange, from Malta to Bolivia. chambered spaces designed to sing, to focus sound, to amplify vibration. Music was not entertainment. It was sacred science. Sound, after all, is vibration, and vibration is the essence of matter. To tune stone was to tune space itself. To vibrate the air inside a chamber was to speak with the universe. In this sense, the pyramid may be a kind of symphony, a sculpture of vibration, a place where geometry, astronomy, and intention converge. And like any great work, it invites interpretation. It resists closure. Each generation returns to it with new questions. Was it a tomb, a temple, a machine? Perhaps it was all of these and none. Perhaps it is what memory looks like when it's carved in stone. Even the Egyptians of later dynasties seem to sense this. In the New Kingdom, more than 1,000 years after Khufu, priests and kings returned to Giza, restoring temples, erecting stelae. They called the place sacred. They revered it not as their own creation, but as an inheritance, a gift from the gods, a relic from Zep-Tepi the first time. When the world was made new, their myths speak of gods walking among men, of sacred mounds rising from the flood, of pyramids shining in a world reborn. Whether history or metaphor, the message is the same. What was lost could be remembered. And perhaps that is the true power of the pyramid, not as proof, but as provocation, not as an answer, but as a question posed in stone. To those who came after, can you see what we saw? Can you hear what we heard? Can you remember what we once knew? The pyramid endures not because it holds treasure, but because it holds time. And in its silent chambers, in its perfect lines, in the chill of its shadow at dawn, we may still feel the echo of an age that remembered more than it forgot. To the ancient Egyptians, the world was divided not only by geography, but by principle. They called their homeland Kemet, the Black Land, named for the fertile, dark soil deposited by the Nile's annual flood. It was life-giving, abundant, ordered. Everything outside of it was Deshret, the Red Land, the chaotic wilderness of the desert. This was not just a map of territory. It was a map of reality, of the seen and unseen, of harmony and entropy, of memory and forgetting. In this duality, we find the core of the Egyptian worldview and perhaps the deeper meaning behind their monuments. The Nile was more than a river. It was the spine of civilization, the axis around which life rotated. Its flood was not feared, but welcomed. It arrived with precision, heralded by the heliacal rising of Sirius. The first drop of floodwater was a moment of cosmic synchronization when sky and earth, star and river, converged. The Nile did not just nourish the land, it defined time. It dictated calendars, festivals, and agricultural cycles. Without it, Kemet could not exist, but the Nile was also a line of memory. It was the thread that connected the past to the present. As the Sahara dried and people migrated eastward, they brought with them fragments of a green world now gone. The desert, once teeming with life, became Deshret. Yet even in its silence, it preserved the memory of water. Ancient lake beds like the Fayum Depression and the once mighty Lake Megachad reveal a Sahara that was once lush, full of rivers, forests, and rain. Cave paintings in Gilf, Kibir, and Tassili Naja show animals that no longer roam the desert: giraffes, elephants, even swimmers paddling through water that has long since vanished. These were not fantasies, they were records, and those who carried these memories eastward may have encoded them in the structures they left behind. The pyramids, the temples, the Sphinx built on the edge where Kemet met Deshret serve not just as monuments to kings, but as monuments to climate, to loss, to survival. Their location is deliberate: high ground, stable ground, ground above the floodline, yet close enough to water for transport and life. They were built where permanence was possible. Geological studies of the Giza Plateau support this. Core samples beneath the pyramids reveal alternating layers of clay and sand, suggesting the presence of ancient floodplains and periods of heavy rain. Fossilized diatoms, microscopic algae that grow only in fresh water, have been found in the sediment. The limestone itself bears vertical erosion fluting, consistent with rainfall over long periods. Not wind. This was once a land that breathed water, and the monuments may have been placed here not only for spiritual reasons, but because the ground told a story, the story of Earth's own rhythms. Egyptian cosmology mirrors these rhythms. The god Atum rose from the primeval waters of Nun to create the first mound of land. From this mound came the gods of air, moisture, and light Shu, Tefnut, and Ra. Every year, the Nile's flood reenacted this creation story. The land submerged, then rose again. The black soil spread across the valley, renewing life. Creation was not a single event, but a cycle, one that could be measured, predicted, and honored. The pyramid, in this light, becomes a symbol of the Ben stone, the first land, the anchor of the world. But the Egyptians also knew what it meant when the cycles broke, when the rains failed, when Deshret expanded. In the pyramid texts, the Red Land is described as dangerous, the realm of chaos. It is where Set, the god of disorder and violence, roamed. And yet, even Deshret had a role. It was the necessary contrast. Without it, the order of Kemet could not be defined. This duality permeated every aspect of life, day and night, flood and drought, birth and death. When the African humid period ended, around 500 years ago, the desert reclaimed the West. The people who had once thrived in the Green Sahara retreated to the Nile Valley. Genetic studies show a blending of populations around this time. Sub-Saharan and North African lineages mixing in the emerging culture of Egypt. This was not a collapse. It was a convergence, and the civilization that emerged along the Nile bore the memory of both lands, the abundance of Kemet and the silence of Deshret. They built their cities along the riverbanks. They oriented their temples to the rising sun. They carved the story of the cosmos into their walls. And at Giza, they raised structures that could not be forgotten. Structures that sat precisely on the threshold between black and red, between water and sand. The pyramids are not in the center of the valley. They are on the edge. That edge is symbolic. It is where memory is tested, where the past is almost out of reach, but not quite. Even the name Kemet holds meaning, derived from the word kem, meaning black. It speaks not just to soil, but to transformation. In later traditions, the root becomes the basis for the word alchemy, the art of transformation. The blackness is not death. It is potential, the fertile dark from which life arises. And the red, the barren, the empty, it is what waits when memory fades. The builders of Giza knew this. They carved their dreams not into the green land, where life would obscure it, but into the red, where only the wind and time would remain. Today, the same desert that threatens to erase these monuments is what has preserved them. The paradox of preservation, the dryness that kills life, keeps stone alive. Textiles vanish, bodies decay, but granite endures. In the very harshness of Deshret, the memory of Kemet survives. So when we walk the plateau, we are walking a boundary not just of land, but of meaning. Kemet and Deshret, order and chaos, remembering and forgetting. The monuments are not just old, they are still standing on that line, as if waiting for rain, for green, for someone to look beyond sand and stone and see the memory hidden beneath. The Egypt we know is a thin veil stretched over something deeper. Every statue unearthed, every tomb opened, every artifact catalogued represents a fraction of what once was. Less than 2% of Egypt's landmass has been systematically excavated. The rest remains untouched. Millions of square kilometers of desert and delta, hiding layers of time beneath wind and silt. We think of the ancient world as exposed, but it is not. It is buried, and what is hidden may change everything we believe about how civilization began. Beneath modern cities like Cairo and Alexandria lie forgotten strata of human occupation. Year after year, the Nile flooded and receded, depositing new layers of fertile soil. Each flood covered the remains of villages, markets, temples, over thousands of years. This process created a deep palimpsest history layered upon history. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetic surveys have revealed walls, foundations, and lost streets buried beneath modern neighborhoods. But most of these finds cannot be excavated. The living city stands above them, guarding the past with concrete and asphalt. To the north, along the Mediterranean coast, the sea has swallowed even more. During the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose by over 120 meters, drowning coastal settlements worldwide. Egypt's ancient coastline lay much farther north than it does today. If early cities existed, their ports, trade hubs, or religious centers, they are now underwater. Only in recent decades have marine archaeologists begun to explore these submerged realms. The discoveries have been astonishing. In the early 2000s, the cities of Heracleion and Canopus were rediscovered off the coast of modern-day Alexandria. Once thriving centers of commerce and ritual, they vanished beneath the waves over 1,000 years ago, victims of subsidence and sea level rise. When divers first entered their remains, they found colossal statues, crumbled temples, and dock structures buried in sand. These cities were lost for millennia not to myth, but to silt and salt, and they are recent by Egyptian standards. If cities that stood during the time of Cleopatra can vanish so completely, what might lie beneath the sea from 10,000 years ago? Farther inland, in the vast western desert, other secrets rest beneath dunes. The Sahara was not always dry. During the African humid period, it bloomed with rivers, lakes, and human settlements. When the rains retreated, the sands returned, covering everything. In places like Gilf Kibir and the Great Sand Sea, the satellite imagery reveals straight lines and rectilinear patterns beneath the sand, features unlikely to be natural. LiDAR and synthetic aperture radar, technologies that can see through the sand, are now revealing buried walls, paths, and possible structures. But the desert is vast, and much remains unexamined. In the Fayum Basin, once a fertile lake region, archaeologists have uncovered Neolithic tools, remnants of boats, and signs of early agriculture. Yet nearby lie expanses of unsearched ground, areas where only a few test pits have been dug. The deeper layers, where even older cultures may sleep, have not been touched. Time and budget constraints slow exploration. Political instability halts it, and beneath it all, the earth continues to shift, exposing some things while hiding others even deeper. Even within the Great Pyramid, one of the most studied structures in the world, surprises still emerge. In 2017, a team using muon tomography, a technique that tracks cosmic rays, discovered a large void above the Grand Gallery. It had never been seen before. No known passage leads to it. Its purpose remains unknown. A structural cavity? A sealed chamber? An unopened archive of the ancient world? We don't know. What we do know is that even in the most famous monument on Earth, mystery remains. Technology is beginning to crack open the door to this invisible Egypt. Infrared satellite imaging has revealed hundreds of potential tombs and settlements. LiDAR is mapping terrain obscured by vegetation or dunes. Artificial intelligence is being trained to detect subtle geometric patterns that might indicate buried architecture. In time, these tools may reconstruct ancient landscapes, showing where rivers once flowed and people once gathered. But technology alone cannot reveal meaning. It can show us the outlines, but we must supply the story. And stories are hiding everywhere. In the oases of the Western Desert, recent surveys uncovered burial sites that predate dynastic Egypt by thousands of years. In one remote location near Gebel Uweinat, pottery shards, stone tools, and animal bones point to a community that once thrived when the Sahara was green. Some of the engravings on nearby rocks show stylized figures, solar symbols, and abstract patterns. Are these art, ritual, or record? The interpretations remain open. Then there are the anomalies, the places that don't fit. The Osirian at Abydos, buried deep underground, built with stones larger than those in the pyramid itself. The Sphinx temple, constructed with megalithic limestone blocks so precisely fitted that even modern engineers marvel. These structures lack inscriptions. They seem to appear from nowhere, no prototypes, no earlier examples. As if someone knew what they were doing from the start, as if they remembered something we've forgotten. The silence of these places is profound, not just literal, but historical. They sit quietly, without explanation. The official records skip them, the textbooks pass over them, but they endure, and that endurance may be their message. In a world where words fade and cities fall, stone remains. And what we have dismissed as myth may be history waiting to be rediscovered. Perhaps one day, the tools we now possess will peel back the sand fully. Perhaps we will find beneath Egypt's surface the true beginning not of kings and conquests, but of memory, of people who watched the stars, who survived a flood, who built not for glory, but for remembrance, a civilization that whispered across time not with language, but with alignment, not with ink, but with stone, long before history, before pharaohs ruled, before hieroglyphs etched their magic into temple walls. The ancient Egyptians spoke of a moment called Zep Tepi, the first time. In their mythology, it was the era when gods walked the earth, when chaos was subdued and order established, when the foundations of civilization were laid not by humans, but by divine hands. It was not remembered like a legend, but revered like a memory, not allegory, but origin. Zep Tepi was the beginning of everything, and according to the Egyptians, it happened in Egypt. In the city of Heliopolis, the priests preserved this sacred cosmology. They told of the god Atum, who rose from the primeval waters of Nun and stood upon the Benben, the first mound of earth. From this solitary act, all creation flowed: light, air, moisture, and eventually, life. Every dawn was a reenactment of that moment. Every temple, a symbolic recreation of the primeval hill. The capstones of pyramids, those missing golden apexes, were modelled after the Benben itself. In this worldview, time was not linear but cyclical. The first time wasn't long ago, it was always now. This recurring cycle of creation mirrors the rhythm of the earth itself. Modern science tells us that around 700 years ago, the Younger Dryas ended, and the Holocene began. Temperatures rose, rain returned, ice melted, sea levels climbed. The world was reborn. In the Nile Valley, this meant floodplains, fertility, and the return of life. From an ecological standpoint, it was a new beginning. From a mythological one, it was Zep Tepi. What the priests called the first time may have been a poetic remembrance of a very real environmental renaissance. Some researchers have taken this further. They argue that Zep Tepi encodes advanced knowledge, that the alignment of pyramids, the stellar correlations, the sacred geometry, all point to an inheritance from an earlier, now vanished world. When the ancients described the gods as beings who restored order, perhaps they were describing survivors, keepers of lost knowledge, engineers of memory. If so, the myths are not fables. They are veiled histories, compressed into symbolism. waiting for the right question to unlock them. The inventory stealer, discovered near the Sphinx in the 19th century, tells of Khufu visiting a temple already ancient in his time. He finds the monument of a lion facing east, the Sphinx already there. He restores it, not builds it. Egyptologists dismiss the stealer as late fiction, but its story fits the geological evidence. The erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure suggest that it predates the Old Kingdom by millennia. Could the Sphinx have been a monument from Zep Tepi, raised in a world that still remembered the rains? If the Sphinx and the pyramids were restorations, not innovations, then the builders of dynastic Egypt were not inventors of civilization, but its inheritors. They stood at the threshold of a memory so old it had no script. They encoded it in architecture, in the alignment of temples, in the rituals of coronation. Every pharaoh, upon ascending the throne, underwent a ritual reenactment of Zep Tepi. He became the new Horus, restoring order to chaos, just as the gods had done in the beginning. This was not mythic vanity, it was cultural continuity. The symbolism runs deep. The Black Land of Kemet, reborn each year by the flooding Nile, echoed the emergence of land from the waters of Nun. The pyramid, shaped like the rays of the sun or the Benben stone, was not just a tomb but a resurrection machine. In the pyramid texts, the king ascends to the stars, becomes one with Osiris in Orion, sails across the sky in a solar bark. These are not just metaphors for the afterlife, they are maps of a cosmic order, preserved in stone, passed down through ritual. Compare this with other cultures, and the pattern intensifies. In Sumer, the Anunnaki descend after the flood to rebuild cities. In the Andes, Viracocha walks the earth, reteaching mankind. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrives after destruction to bring knowledge of the calendar and farming. The pattern is global: a cataclysm, a dark age, and then the return of order led by beings who remember, whether gods, teachers, or survivors. Their role is always the same: to restore what was lost. The pyramid, then, may not be a monument to death at all. It may be a symbol of rebirth, its perfect alignment to cardinal points, its internal geometry, its mathematical harmonies, all may serve a deeper purpose: to resonate with the earth, to mirror the sky, to carry forward a knowledge too sacred, too vital, to entrust to paper or language. Stone does not forget, and if your world was ending, and you had one chance to preserve its memory, you would carve it into the one thing that endures. This is what Zep Tepi offers. Not proof, but perspective, a reminder that what we call myth may be the bones of history. That before the rise of kings, before the invention of writing, there may have been people who understood the stars, the seasons, and the soul, and when their world collapsed, they did not vanish. They encoded their story not in books, but in alignments, not in speech, but in silence. The rituals of Heliopolis reenacted this every year. The high priests poured water over the Benben stone, symbolizing the receding flood. They chanted hymns, calling Atum to rise again. It was not religion in the modern sense, it was remembrance. A ceremony that kept alive, a story of creation not just cosmic, but historical, not just sacred, but scientific. And so, when we look at the pyramids today, we are not looking at relics of superstition. We are looking at a language of memory, a language whose grammar is proportion, whose verbs are orientation, whose subject is survival. We are looking at a civilization that believed the past was never truly gone as long as someone remembered the first time. Night at Giza is different. When the crowds vanish and the floodlights fade, a hush settles over the plateau. The pyramids, once swarmed by tourists, return to their elemental stillness. Their silhouettes sharpen against a sky that has barely changed in 10,000 years. The air becomes cool, and silence takes on weight. You can almost hear the desert breathe, and in that quiet, A question lingers, one that no textbook answers. What were these monuments truly built to say? They are not accidental. The Great Pyramid's base is leveled with unmatched precision. Its four sides aligned to the cardinal directions within a margin of mere arc minutes. The entire structure encodes mathematical constants, pi in its base to height ratio, the golden ratio in its slope. Its height, multiplied by 1,000,000,000, approximates the Earth's polar radius. Its perimeter reflects Earth's equatorial circumference. These are not mystical numerologies. They are physical facts. And they raise a profound possibility that the pyramid is not just an object, but an equation. Why such precision for a tomb? Why construct an edifice so exact, so vast, that it would still defy modern replication today? No body has been found within it. No royal name inscribed. No funerary treasure hidden in secret chambers. The granite coffer in the king's chamber is empty. Its interior worn smooth. It hums at specific frequencies, resonating with the tones of the earth. When struck, it sings. The very geometry of the chamber around it enhances that sound. Engineers have measured this resonance at frequencies that match the Earth's natural vibration. The pyramid doesn't just exist, it participates. Is this merely coincidence, or was it deliberate? Were the builders trying to encode a message not in language, but in form? And if so, who was that message for? The living? The gods? The future? Modern science is only beginning to grasp the subtleties of resonance, harmonic vibration, and the way materials interact with natural frequencies. Yet the Great Pyramid appears to be built with these principles in mind. Its inner chambers resonate, its material components quartz-rich granite, insulating limestone mirror modern capacitor design. The structure focuses energy, not in a mystical sense, but in a measurable one. Electromagnetic simulations have shown that it can concentrate radio waves in specific chambers. Its proportions align with cycles in nature, with the movement of the stars, with the breath of the planet. If this was intentional, then the pyramid is not just a tomb. It is a time capsule, a beacon, a signal, one designed to last, one designed to be discovered, not necessarily understood, but at least felt. To stand beneath its towering bulk is to feel scale in the truest sense. Not just physical scale, but temporal. You are small, not just in size, but in time. This structure was old when Rome was born. When Jesus walked the earth, the pyramid had already stood for 500 years. It has seen empires rise and fall, languages born and buried, religions come and go. And yet, it has not moved. That permanence may be the message. That in a world where everything changes, where cities fall, where floods erase, where memory fades, some truths are worth carving into the bones of the earth. The builders may have known they could not stop the collapse of their world, but they could leave something behind. Something that would say, we were here, we understood, we endured. It's not to stide. Perhaps that is why the pyramid has no inscription. Perhaps the builders knew that language decays, that symbols change, that stories evolve. But geometry? Geometry does not lie. Angles, alignments, ratios, they are constant. They speak across cultures, across epochs. They survive translation. They survive catastrophe. If you wanted to leave a message for the distant future, one that could survive even the loss of civilization itself, you would choose stone. You would choose form. You would build the Great Pyramid. Even now, with all our technology, we have not plumbed all its secrets. Muon scans have revealed hidden chambers, still unexplored. Subterranean anomalies suggest deeper levels beneath the plateau. And above, the stars still wheel through the sky, tracing the same paths the ancient astronomers followed with naked eyes. Orion still rises in the east. Sirius still flashes at dawn. The same constellations, the same rhythms. The pyramid watches them, as it always has, standing there, under the stars. One begins to wonder if perhaps the greatest achievement of the pyramid is not its engineering, but its endurance. It has not only survived time, it has resisted forgetting. It continues to speak not in words, but in wonder, not in fact, but in resonance. It asks a question, not just who built it, but why. Were they survivors of a cataclysm, engineers of a knowledge we no longer possess, dreamers who refuse to let the flood take everything? The question echoes in the limestone corridors, in the shadows of chambers that have not seen sunlight in 500 years. It hums in the granite beams above the king's chamber. It lingers in the quiet between stars. In the end, the pyramid may not offer answers. It may only offer the question, a final question, one that refuses to die. What if everything we think we know is only the beginning?